Gonna go ahead and start that recording. All right. So I guess I just want to start and have you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've gotten into the work that you're doing.
Good. So thank you for having me. I'm Will Harris. The name of my farm in Bluffton, Georgia is White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures has been in my family for 156 years. I'm the fourth generation. I have two daughters and two in-laws helping me run the farm today as the fifth generation. And between them, they've got 5 babies who are the sixth generation on the farm. The farm is primarily livestock. We pasture raise 5 red meat species: cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits. And we hand butcher them in a USDA inspected slaughterhouse that I built here on the farm. We pasture raise 5 poultry species: chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, and ducks. We hand butcher them in a separate USDA inspected slaughter facility. We raise pastured eggs, organic vegetables, honey, and a number of other little ancillary sort of businesses that are produced here on the farm.
That's wonderful. So I hear that you've got like a lot of different types of species on the farm, and have kind of grown to a lot. Where did you guys, so you started in cattle, is that correct?
Yeah. So my grandfather ran the farm in a manner that was fairly similar to what we do today, multi-species, focused on the land, the animals, and the community. My dad industrialized the farm post-World War II. It became a centralized commodity industrial cattle farm, monoculture of only cattle. And about 25 years ago, I started moving the model back. I ran the farm industrially as my father had for 20 years. But in the mid-90s, I started moving back to production practices that were actually more similar to what my great-grandfather and grandfather did in terms of being multi-species and focused on the land and the animals.
Awesome.
Hey, Heather, I threw in the chat, like, I think it would be great if Will could talk about monoculture and how that is just not a good system a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about monoculture?
So monoculture is a term that I use to describe a production farm that produces only one species, or if it does produce multiple species, it silos the species separately. It is the epitome of the factory farm model. In a factory, you make shirts or cars or buttons. In a factory farm, you make pigs or corn or tomatoes, independent of anything else. And we believe that sort of farming is taking a complex system, which is this farm, a biome, a living system, cyclical system, and turning it into a very complicated linear system like a factory.
Mm-hmm.
And that is when that's done, when we farmers do that, we use technology, misuse technologies to break the cycles of nature. And when we break the cycles of nature, we cause the earth to not have an abundance. When the cycles of nature are operating optimally, an abundance is produced. And that's what we lived on for millions of years. All that coal and oil and gas in the ground is the abundance of nature from the era of the dinosaur, when the cycles of nature were cycling optimally. And we use technologies like pesticides, chemical fertilizers, subtherapeutic antibiotics, ionophores. We break those cycles of nature and it has negative unintended consequences.
Awesome. Thank you for going through that. Maybe a little bit of a tangent, but is there anything that surprised you as you started to move away from monoculture into that more integrated system that was a benefit you didn't expect to see?
Oh, it was a surprise after surprise after surprise. 25 years later, I'm still getting them. But first of all, a disappointing surprise is how long it took to bring life back to my soil. Through the use of cultivation, chemical fertilizers, and pesticides, our soil had become a dead mineral medium. And the goal is to have it a organic medium that's teeming with life. And it can be brought back, but it is incredibly hard, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of animal impact. Conversely, a pleasant surprise is how productive the land is when you do go through that pain and get it back as a thriving organic medium. It's incredibly productive, but it takes a long time and it's hard.
What spurred the dedication to make that change?
I had farmed industrially for 20 years and really was a heavy-handed abuser of those technologies. So I probably became more aware of the unwanted, unintended consequences of using those technologies. So it caused me to want to not do that anymore. I use the example, if you drink a couple glasses of wine every night, you probably won't ever see the downside of being an alcoholic. If you drink a quart of liquor every night, you'll probably see the downside of being an alcoholic. And I was a heavy-handed abuser of the technologies. So I saw that downside and didn't like it and chose to move away from it. And I was fortunate in that I'd inherited a paid-for farm so I could afford to move away from it. And I did. And in moving away from it, we made less money because we lost short-term productivity on the land. But in the long term, we gained productivity. But you've got to be able to afford to make that transition.
Yeah, that's really inspiring that you were able to see the long game of it. So that's very cool to hear. Moving a little bit into your animals, I know that you're passionate about ensuring animals enjoy the best animal welfare standards. Can you tell me a bit about that?
I can. So to me, in 25, I was of agriculture and animal science. But to me, good animal welfare meant that it was incumbent upon me as the stockman to keep the animal well fed, well watered, in a comfortable temperature range, and that I not intentionally inflict pain and suffering on the animal. And if I did those, check those 4 boxes, that was okay. That's good animal welfare. And it occurred to me later that certainly you got to do those 4 things, but beyond that, it's incumbent upon the animal husbandman, the stockman, me, to give the animal an environment in which it can express instinctive behavior, create that environment for them, to put them in a cage or a concrete slab or otherwise confine them so they can't express instinctive behavior is not humane. Instinctive behavior, for instance, would be cows roam and graze. And if they can't do that, I think they're under stress 24/7. Chickens are meant to scratch and peck. Hogs are meant to root and wallow. And in the industrial confinement model, those animals aren't allowed to do those things. And I think that's not good animal welfare. They may be well fed, well watered, and comfortable from a temperature perspective. But they're still, that's not, it's like taking a child and putting them in a closet. And you do that so they won't get hurt, they won't get sick, they won't get abducted. They'll be fine. And you keep it 72 degrees and the lights on, and you feed them all the Doritos and Cheetos and Oreos they want. But that's not good parenting. They're not able to express instinctive behavior. So it's very similar.
That makes a lot of sense. My video did cut out a little bit at the beginning. Would you mind going back and repeating those 4 items?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I believe good animal welfare would, prior to rethinking it, consisted of keeping them well fed, keeping animals well fed, well watered, in a comfortable temperature range, and to not intentionally inflict pain and suffering on the animal. I felt as though if I did that, that was pretty good animal welfare until I rethought it.
And that's when it came in that you needed them to be able to express their instinctive behavior?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you for going back on that for me. Moving on to our next question, as long as my colleagues are okay with that.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, I
Perfect.
think you're doing great.
Okay. Can you tell us a bit about what regenerative land management is and why it's so important?
So we believe that industrial monocultural farming breaks the cycles of nature. We feel that that's done through the abuse of technologies being pesticides, chemical fertilizers, subtherapeutic antibiotics, etc. And that when those technologies are misused, the cycles of nature are broken. The cycles of nature would be the water cycle, carbon cycle, energy cycle, mineral cycle, microbial cycle, etc. And regenerative land management or regenerative farming is to restart those cycles of nature. And it can be done, but it's a slow process. It takes a while. And I also believe that it cannot cost effectively be done without animal impact. The earth evolved with animal impact as one of the forces of evolution. So if we're going to restart the cycles of nature, that ingredient, animal impact, has got to be in the mix. If you were going to, if your grandmother had a great recipe for brownies, and you wanted to recreate it, and you put in all the ingredients she put in except sugar, it'd be a very different brownie. And I believe that the earth evolved wherever you are, from tropics to high desert to ecosystem. Animal impact was an ingredient. So to restart the cycles of nature when they've been stopped requires animal impact.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
May I interrupt for just 1 second? Just being sort of a more layperson who's new to this whole topic, I hear you talking about the cycle of nature being broken. Why is it important that the cycle of nature not be broken? I mean, it's pretty obvious, but can you encapsulate just in a layperson's term why that's important?
Mm-hmm. So the cycles of nature create an abundance. That abundance created by cycles of nature are really the only true form of wealth. That's when we take a good, healthy soil, healthy microbial population, and precipitation in the form of rain or snow or fog, and the radiation of the sun, and through the magic of photosynthesis, that energy is captured. Some of it feeds, some of that energy, the photosynthesis is the plant breathes in greenhouse gases. It's just, and it turns, and which is gaseous carbon, and it turns that gaseous carbon into liquid carbon, which is sucrose, the sugars that are put down to the roots, and solid carbon in the form of the plant material, the leaf or the root itself. And that energy that's put down to the roots in the form of sucrose, and those roots actually leak. We didn't know that when I was in college, taking soils, but those roots intentionally leak. And that leak allows that energy, that sugar, to go into the soil where the microbes consume it. Those microbes need energy, and there's no energy down there. It's dark under the surface of the soil. But they consume that, it's called exudate, that liquid sucrose sugar that the plant emits, and they exchange it to the plant for positive ions of minerals, calcium and phosphorus and potassium and sulfur. So it's a symbiotic relationship. That plant, for the radiation energy from the sun, for power, breathing in greenhouse gases, putting it down to the root feeding the microbes feeding the plant with the minerals that it mines from rocks or stones. It's just a really beautiful system, and it yields an abundance. And the abundance is what the animals of the world eat, consume. That's where we get our energy from. Every living thing will die eventually. Redwood trees, everything will die. And every living thing gets its nutrition by consuming something that's dead, whether you're a carnivore or a vegetarian or a vegetable or an insect. And in a healthy ecosystem, nothing stays dead for long. When something dies, it becomes feed for some other living thing, be it a microbe or plant or an animal. So those cycles of nature that I just described to you are where all the fossil fuel in the ground was put there by the sun when the cycles of nature were operating optimally.
So all of the technologies that you talked about, that's a man-made way of trying to enhance that cycle of nature that you say works fine. What was the impetus behind all of these technologies?
So mechanical systems like factories or your iPhone or your car are very complicated. There's a lot going on to make them work. And if one component quits working, it doesn't work anymore. Reductionist science works well on complicated systems like that. It's how we put a man on the moon. It is extremely efficacious, reductive science. Reductive science does not work nearly so well on a complex system like your body or an ecosystem or a farm. In all those systems, a lot more to make it work. One to work, things morph and it keeps going. And reductive science, when it's applied to those kinds of systems, often has unintended consequences. And those unintended consequences are almost invariably unwanted consequences.
So Heather, I'm sorry to interrupt, and if I could just follow up with two more questions on this thread. So what is your advice to other animal husbandries or farmers like yourself? What is that advice on the business end? And what is the effect that consumers like myself should know and understand? And what should we be doing to support the effort?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. If consumers subscribe to the differences that I'm explaining to you of industrial land management versus holistic or regenerative land management, then they need to support the system they believe in. They may believe that the more industrial factory farm model is the right model, and if they do, they should source their food from big ag and big food and support that model. And many, I say most people do. Some people subscribe to the fact that the food chain provided by big food and big ag have unintended and unwanted consequences, and they would prefer to support a model that works in cooperation with nature to restart the cycles of nature. And similarly, they should seek out those suppliers and source their product there. Wendell Berry is a poet, farmer, writer in Kentucky, and he says, he's a role model of mine. He says many, many, many great things. And I'll paraphrase this. I can't quote it, but he says something to the effect that consumers need to support the way with their dollar, their food dollar, the way they want the world to be. And I think that's very, very true. If consumers find this form of land management and food production to be pleasing, they need to find a farm that they can use to support. And if they don't, then they should buy it from the big food complex that feeds most of the world. Oh, the other question was, I think, I'm sorry. The first part of that question was, what should farmers?
On the business end, yeah.
Yeah. So the advice I would give a farmer that is considering moving from an industrial food production model to a holistic regenerative food production model is to not be guilty of, as so many people are, so many farmers are, if I can just learn how to produce food, manage my farm without misusing technologies, just figure all that out, then I'll be good to go. That's what you got to do, and it'll be okay. Well, that's not true, and a lot of people have and will go broke under that assumption because consumers don't buy hogs and cows and sheep; they buy beef and pork and lamb. So the farmer, in addition to figuring out the production model, has got to figure out how to monetize it. And even when you figure out how to get the product in a form that's monetizable, you've got to figure out market access. So it's like three hills. The first hill you climb as a farmer is how to farm without misusing technologies. The second hill you climb is how do I make it monetizable without depending upon big ag? And the third one is market access, and it's how do I get it to the consumer without utilizing big food? So it's a difficult process, and that's why there aren't a whole lot of people doing it.
Thank you so much, Heather. I'm sorry to have interrupted. I'm going to sit back now and listen to the rest of your brilliant question.
No, you're good. Thank you, Melissa. So that all kind of leads well into the next question, which is how your transformation of White Oak Pastures has also breathed new life into Bluffton, Georgia. Can you tell us about that?
I can. So when I decided to farm differently, I gave a lot of thought to how I was managing my land and managing my animals. And I knew what I was doing. I knew I didn't like it. I knew I wanted to do differently. So I really put a lot of effort into figuring out how to make changes. And I made those changes. And, you know, some things worked, some didn't. What didn't, I'd rethink it and try something else and work or not. If it didn't, I'd rethink it and so on. I never gave any thought to the impact it would have on my community. Today, the things that we think we do well are regenerative land management, compassionate animal welfare, and rural community building. But I didn't give any thought at all to the community building part because I didn't think there was anything I could do about that. You know, at the time I was 40 years old and had been living here all my life, and I'd seen the town had done nothing except decay in my lifetime and before my lifetime. And I looked around and the other communities in the area, rural communities, had decayed similarly. So I didn't think there was anything I could do about that. So I didn't think about it. But when I changed the way I managed the land and the animals and put in the further processing, because I had to get away from big ag, and put in the marketing because I had to get away from big food, we wound up moving from 3 or 4 minimum wage employees to about 180 employees that made well over the county average. So we brought those people in here, talented, passionate people, mostly young people, and they needed a place to eat and sleep and drink and play, and we built it. We provided it. And suddenly, organically, we had a nice little town again. And I sort of, not only did I not plan it, I kind of didn't even notice it until it was already well on its way to occurring. So what I figured out from that is that centralized, industrialized farming renders rural America economically irrelevant. But financially, it's just not needed anymore. So it atrophies away. And when we started farming again, not in that industrialized, centralized commodity model, the town became financially, economically relevant, and it resurged. So Bluffton, Georgia, where I'm sitting right now, literally went from a ghost town, a decaying ghost town, to a really nice, pleasant little destination, which is what it is today, in about 15 years, and did it without a city planner or an urban planner or a trust fund or a big influx of tax dollars. It just became relevant again.
That's really wonderful. It makes me think of, I watched a video in preparation for this meeting, and you said something in one of them about how you talk about the beating hearts on your land, which include not only the people that work there, but also the animals. And it's just a comment becoming very clear how much you care about all of those beating hearts that you take care of. And I think that's wonderful. So kind of in line with that, the next question is, how can we prioritize the re-enrichment of rural America? What is your suggestion for everyone else to kind of do what you've been doing?
Well, I think that the proper land management and proper animal management and a proper resilient food chain is the girl that brought rural America to the party. And I think that's the girl that's going to have to bring us back to the party. You know, the Bluffton, Georgia, where I am here, has never had a railroad, ever. Never had a factory, never had a mill, purely agrarian economy. So when we fell harder than most. So I think that rebuilding an active rural economy is beneficial in many ways. And one, the economic description I just gave you. maybe more importantly, as importantly, maybe more importantly, is it builds a resilient food supply. The system that I explained to you earlier, that linear, scalable factory model, is highly scalable. And it offers the opportunity for incredible efficiency. The living systems model, that cyclical model, is highly resilient. It's not highly scalable. So you lose some of that efficiency that can come from scaling something up and up and up. But it's highly resilient. And that means, and to me, everybody knows what efficiency means. I think it means you can produce it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Resiliency to me means the system has the capacity to take a licking, hard knock and keep functioning. And, you know, the pandemic recently would probably be the best example of that of my lifetime. We big factories, big meat packing plants ceased to operate, and animals had to be euthanized because they weren't healthy enough to just keep living until the plant opened back. And in our case, we never missed a day's operation, and no animal was ever euthanized because I couldn't get to it. Now, I'm not saying that nothing can ever stop our plant from operating. We can have a hard enough lick that it happens. But if it did, it probably wouldn't affect every other plant in the country. Whereas if you've got a very small number of very huge plants, and a small number of them go down for whatever reason, you've got a problem. You've got a problem with your supply line. And it's the food supply line. You know, the food supply line is fragile and essential. And it's a bad idea to have something that's fragile and essential. That's a real bad idea.
Yeah, that was very well. I'm very moved by what you just said. Like, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah.
I'm just freaking telling you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's something that makes total sense when you say it, but I don't think people often think about where their food comes from these days. So it's important to remind them.
Where we sold the book, the book rights on White Oak Pastures to Random House, Penguin, and it's about these things we're talking about. And it's coming out this September, and it's called A Bold Return to Giving a Damn. And you know, if they sell one copy or a billion copies, it's not going to mean much to me economically. I mean, I sold the book, it's gone. But I really hope that it does commands some readership, simply because I think people need to know these things. And most of us, you know, farmers, they say farmers are 1% of the population. Probably right. I would say that of that 1%, less than 1% of them are regenerative farmers. So there's aren't many of us. And most of us, I know I got just about all of them's number in my cell phone. And you know, and we're not a really smart group of people in terms of being able to present and go, and we don't make our living convincing folks of stuff. So I think that the number of us that understand the ills of the food production system are a very small number, and most of us don't have a very big platform to speak from, and most of us don't have make our living convincing folks to do different. So, you know, and don't forget, the big ag, big food don't want that word out. And whose voice is louder? Me and 50 other guys, or big food, big ag? And gals, guys and gals, not just guys. Excuse me.
Totally. Kind of on a separate before I move on to our last question, forgive me, this wasn't on our list before. So I want to ask you about the intersection between animal welfare and antibiotics, because a lot of our work is in antibiotics. So what have you seen with that intersection of antibiotics and animal welfare?
Well, there's a lot wrong with the abuse of antibiotics in animals. And it gets back to what I told you earlier about misused technology breaking the cycles of nature. So it's one of many examples we could use. And I would say from a welfare perspective, using antibiotics allows factory farms to prop up a system in which the animals probably aren't really doing very well. You can.
Sorry, can I pause you 1 second? My video skipped. Can I have you go back a couple sentences? I'm sorry about that.
I have no idea where that was.
I kind of lost you at animal welfare. The very beginning.
Just to make it easier, let's start over again entirely.
Yeah.
That's great.
Sorry.
Ask a question.
Can you tell me a bit about the intersection between antibiotics and animal welfare?
I would say that antibiotics abuse in animal welfare is a great example of what the misused technologies I talked to you about earlier. Those misused technologies could be pesticides, chemical fertilizer, hormone implants. In this case, we're talking about antibiotic abuse. It's a technology that has a place, but it's been misused and it breaks the cycles of nature in an animal production system. It allows a animal producer to use less than optimum animal husbandry, but prop it up by giving them antibiotics. Maybe the conditions weren't as clean as they should be. Maybe they were feeding an unnatural feed stuff. A lot of things can be propped up by misusing this technology. So animal welfare would be one issue. Probably a more immediate issue might be the fact that when antibiotics are used at a subtherapeutic level in animals, it allows pathogens to develop a resistance to that antibiotic. And that antibiotics are precious. There are only so many. And if your baby is sick, and the antibiotic that ought to be efficacious against that pathogen is no good because we've been using that antibiotic at subtherapeutic levels and bred a generation of pathogen that's just immune to it, then that's a really bad thing. You know, your hamburger or hot dog was a little cheaper because you use antibiotic, but your baby, you didn't have the antibiotic to use to get your baby well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Leads well into our last question, which is, what is one thing that you think people can do to actually help battle superbugs?
Well, I think the one thing that people can do to battle superbugs is to support farms that don't use subtherapeutic antibiotics.
Beautifully said. Those are all of my questions. I'm gonna open it up to my colleagues. Have anything else?
Well, that was just really great and really fascinating in general. I have nothing else for you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I would like for the people who watch this video to know where they could buy White Oak Pastures meat products.
We primarily sell our product online through our website, which is whiteoakpastures.com. It's delivered to the consumer's home through UPS or FedEx. We deal with some grocery stores. We no longer deal with Whole Foods Market. We do deal with Publix, Kroger, Giant Eagle. and moms. Well, and really the best way for us, for people to support us, is through our website. You're buying from direct from us.
That's great. I don't have anything else. Will, you're, as always, money.